So, Primaris is buying malls. Primaris is the only Canadian REIT that is focused exclusively on enclosed shopping centers. While others are selling, Primaris is buying, and they're buying a lot. Since Alex Avery became CEO in 2021, Primaris has completed $3.3 billion worth of acquisitions. Now, I want to know more about the Primaris strategy, so that is what we're digging into today. My guest today is Primaris CEO Alex Avery. You're listening to Where We Buy. It's the show where we talk with retail experts and we visit the places where we buy. My name is James Cook. I research retail and real estate for JLL. Welcome, Alex, to Where We Buy. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, James.
Oh, man. Sometimes you get somebody that represents their city so well, but I've never had it done as much as you. We've got the Toronto skyline in the background. We're in the Blue Jays. We got a lot of pride going on right now. Good for you.
Well, last night was Game 5, and it was a good outing for Toronto.
Yes, absolutely. So, gosh, there's got to be so much excitement in the city. You are, the Blue Jays are Canada's team now. You're not just representing Toronto. It's, the whole nation is behind you.
Yeah, I read a stat that something like 1 in 4 Canadians watched the game last night.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So we're recording this on October 30th. So you had an earnings call this morning. Congratulations. Excellent
Thank you.
earnings. Any other highlights that analysts ask you about or that you were excited to talk about today on the call?
Yeah, I mean, we've got all sorts of stuff going on. I sometimes say that it's like a beehive of activity at Primaris. We've been extremely busy for the past 3.75 years since we spun out. That spin out came with an $800 million 6-property acquisition. So, we started hot and the pace has not slowed down. The most topical things today would be the most recent acquisitions. We've completed the acquisition of 4 malls this year for a little over $1.5 billion. The last one was a $500 million acquisition announced at the beginning of October. So we spent a bunch of time talking about that. The last remaining conventional department store in Canada declared bankruptcy at the beginning of the year. We had 10 locations, and so, we got control of half of them in June, and we're going to get control of the other half of them at the end of November. So lots and lots of leasing activity that has gone on there, and we were talking a lot about that this morning. I think, there's been a few department store failures in Canada over the past 25 years, and, they've taken a lot of time and energy, but the backdrop in the market today is more of a landlord's market than it has been in probably 25 years. It's a very exciting time to be in the mall business.
I love it. Okay, you hit about every topic I want to dig more into. I'm trying to think of where to start. Let's start with Primaris. Let's start with the portfolio. Am I right? You own about 25 enclosed malls. Is that right?
27 now, yes.
You guys, you're moving so fast I can't even keep up. Talk a little bit about the history, the spin-off, the strategy behind it. Give us that background.
Sure. So Primaris was originally IPO'd in 2003 from Oxford Properties, one of the larger Canadian pension plans, as a mall consolidator. It was public for about 10 years, and it was privatized in 2013 by a larger diversified REIT in Canada called H&R. I spent the early part of my career from 2005 till 2017 as a sell-side analyst. I covered H&R, and when I left the sell side, I ended up joining the board of H&R, which in 2017 had owned Primaris or the large part of Primaris for about 4 or 5 years at that point. And, when I joined the board, I was sort of tasked with as, something of a restructuring officer type of a role. And so I worked on, some large property monetizations and also the spin out of Primaris. And so in 2020, I formally joined the management team and got to work on executing the spinout. And what was really interesting about the timing and the nature of that situation was that, malls had sort of gone into a funk in 2015, and it started in Canada with the departure of Target. And then a few years later, Sears declared bankruptcy. And then we also had the growth of e-commerce that was a headwind for a lot of retailers. And then we ran straight into the pandemic, which in a lot of parts of Canada was a government mandated closure of the malls. And so it was a pretty tough 7 or 8 year period. And what we had the opportunity to do was to spin out Primaris into a standalone entity. And at the time, we really had a blank slate because Primaris was a much smaller entity than H&R. And so I looked back on my, 12 or 13 years as a sell-side analyst, talking with investors, understanding, how they prefer things to be run in a REIT. Look back at all of the REITs that I had dealt with and, witnessed what they did, what they said, what worked, what didn't work. And so we really designed Primaris from a blank slate at the absolute bottom of the cycle of the mall cycle. I think one of the things that is easy to lose track of when you're in the moment in real estate is that it is cyclical, and the property cycles don't always align across property types. But I would say, if there was a 1,000-year storm in the mall business, it was 2015 until 2022, really. And so we created this entity, and the Canadian real estate landscape is unique in a number of respects. We have a number of very large pools of capital, kind of like the Australian system where you have big superannuation funds. The Canadian pension plans are very, very large players on a global scale. If you go to New York, if you go to London, England, the share of the skyline that is owned by Canadian pension plans is way larger than Canada's share of GDP. And those very large pools of capital ended up consolidating the ownership of malls, 20 years ago. And as the real estate landscape has changed, you've had the introduction of cell towers and data centers and life sciences office, and industrial has become quite a hot commodity, and apartments. The focus on malls and office buildings has subsided, and so a lot of the Canadian pension plans have been looking to alter the portfolio construction that they have. And because they're so large in such a small pond, they've created a relatively illiquid situation with a number of sellers and limited buyers. And Primaris just happens to be very focused on enclosed malls, and we are providing liquidity to some of the world's largest pension plan owners of enclosed shopping centers.
So when a pension plan puts up an enclosed mall for sale, is it a pretty small pool of potential buyers that you find yourself amongst?
It absolutely is, and there's a number of reasons for that. The mall business is different from a lot of other real estate. The barriers to entry are quite high. There's a lot of moats around the business. One of them is that the mall business is a scale business. Owning one enclosed shopping center is not a terribly good plan. You don't have the scale to really, grab the attention of retailers. You don't have the scale to, manage the large capital items that come up in the mall business. You don't have the scale to have the infrastructure to manage the properties effectively. And access to capital is another challenge. So, unless you have already got, 6 or 7 or 10 malls, unless you already have an internal management platform, unless you have a robust, really strong financial situation, it's very difficult to get into the mall business. And so there are a limited number of buyers for these shopping centers.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about strategy. So it's just your situation, you start as an analyst, you're highly critical of, other REITs. I'm sure in your mind, you're like, man, if I could, run that myself, I would do this or that. You're one of the people who's had a chance to actually, take all those learnings and put them into action. What's the biggest thing you learned as an analyst that you've now put into play?
The biggest thing I learned as an analyst I would say capital allocation.
Okay.
Uh, it really is the secret sauce of very successful REITs. We talk a lot at Primaris about something we coined as the differentiated financial model. So we have low leverage in Canadian terms. A lot of Canadian REITs have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times debt to EBITDA. We've got under 6 times, and we have a 50% payout ratio. That gives us much more financial flexibility to be able to, grow the business, but also where and how we allocate our capital is really something that we spend a lot of time analyzing, making sure that we're maximizing the return on capital, but also minimizing the cost of capital through a fairly rigorous process that we use to determine, our capital allocation. So that's, one big part of it. I would say the thing that I learned the most going from the sell side. I stopped on the buy side for a few years and did a few other things in between. But um, I think as a sell side analyst, as an investor, I always prided myself on having a longer term view than sometimes people can criticize the public markets as being very short term oriented. And I had not truly appreciated the degree to which the public markets can be very short-term oriented until I got into the management side, where like I had one analyst recently said to me, I don't know why you're buying these properties because I think they'll be available for you to buy them in 6 months. And I said, like, a deal takes 6 months. Like, I'm not sure like how quickly you're expecting us to be able to do these things, but anyway, when you get into the seat in a management role, the time horizon over which you have to be thinking and planning is much, much longer than the public markets are really focused on. And so we've spent an awful lot of time on our strategy.
What was the most unexpected thing to you when you found yourself on the inside of the C-suite? Like, oh, I didn't think this would be like this.
Um, I in a lot of respects, I don't think it's any different than any other job I've had. I work with a bunch of people. We work as a team. I really enjoy the team that I work with here. We have a lot of fun. Um, but I guess, the things that are strange when I go to book time off for vacation, I don't have anyone to go and tell, which is kind of a weird situation. Um, but no, I mean it really is a team here, and we're it's nice to have a tailwind in your business, but the culture is so important. And
Oh yeah.
I'm fortunate to have come into an organization that has been around for over 20 years, but has sort of had a new rebirth. And the culture that I walked into was just a fabulous one.
Yeah. When I think about retail, or just REITs in general, the successful ones, it's almost like a good character in a book or something. Like you can describe them in one sentence, like no, it's like a Marvel movie. Here's their superpower, and the more specific and easy to describe it is, I feel like oftentimes the more successful it is. You kind of touched on this, but what would you say the absolute value add, like, superpower is that Primaris kind of brings?
Well, I think there's
Okay.
two. I have a partner, Pat Sullivan, who's the president and chief operating officer. He's the key man, if there is a key man in our organization. He's been running malls for 25 years, and managing malls is a very, very
Yeah.
specialized capability. And when we buy properties, we can get more NOI out of them because we have this long history of operating these shopping centers and got the whole management platform. So I would say that's one of them, and the other one is really capital allocation. And it's funny you use the term superpower. I've got a SWAT team of analysts here that analyze our own business, from an internal business intelligence perspective. And we've got a recurring series of monthly lunches where we get together and specifically talk about capital allocation. We've got some materials. We read some books that are on the topic, and then we'll go through case studies of other REITs and, what did they do?
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Why did they do it? What was the decision-making process? because I really want to make sure that Primaris has capital allocation as a core superpower. And similarly, on Pat's side of the business, we've spent an awful lot of time on succession planning and making sure that we're really disseminating all of the knowledge that he has around our business into all of the groups of people that work for him on the operations side. And it's uh, he would probably we would probably need 3 or 4 people to replace Pat.
Man, that is, in the retail real estate business, the institutional knowledge that sits in people's brains, it's like you almost can't quantify it. There's so much there. And this is a total side thing, but I think that's why it's so important on all of us to be attracting new people into the business and then teaching them everything that we know so we can kind of keep that going. Okay, no, enough on that. What is the perfect mall for you to acquire? Like, describe the perfect Primaris mall.
We have a lot of perfect malls. I would say it's been interesting because we've had limited competition. We've been able to acquire some really remarkable properties. I could talk about one that we acquired 2 years ago, Halifax Shopping Center. Halifax is a city of 600,000 or 700,000 people. It's been growing, in the 2, 3, 4, 5% annual population growth range for the last several years. It's big enough to have an international airport, a modern hospital. It's got a port. It's got universities. It's got the seat of government. Very diversified economy, and it's a high growth market. But perhaps most importantly about the shopping center, it is the dominant shopping center in the market. So, if you wanted to go to a better mall than Halifax, you would have to drive at least 10 hours to find the next better shopping center. So it really is the dominant retail node for a very large population. I mean, the 600,000 or 700,000 people would be within 45 minutes or an hour of the Halifax shopping center, but you could draw a much larger catchment and capture a much larger population. So predictably, the mall is full. We have a lineup of retailers that want to get in there. Sales are over $1,000 a square foot, and we don't see any reason why it won't continue to grow at a healthy clip.
Gotcha. So that dominant mall in a strong city that is kind of the best mall where you really own the market. So you mentioned Hudson's Bay. A lot of our listeners are outside of Canada, so I want to kind of make sure they understand the story. How do you, can you kind of give a little bit of a historical and kind of where we're at now with the former Hudson's Bay boxes in your portfolio?
We had 10 of them at the beginning of this year. We've subsequently acquired one, and we've acquired a few actually. And now that I think about it, we sold one, acquired two, and maybe three. I'd have to run the math again, but we had 10 when they went bankrupt, and we now have 11. Um, and the story of Hudson's Bay is interesting. It was the oldest continuously incorporated company in Canada, founded in, I don't know, it was 300 and something years ago. Tremendous history. It predates Canada. That's how old it is, and it was bought in the early 2000s by Richard Baker. I think his company was NDC. And he, I think, initially made some pretty smart transactions. He actually sold a bunch of Zeller's leases, which was another banner that was owned by HBC, to Target when they entered Canada. He made a lot of money doing that. And then he sold some other leases, but what ultimately ended up happening was he sort of lost focus on the retail offering, and through a variety of circumstances, basically got to the point where HBC, the Hudson's Bay Company, had really lost its relevance with consumers. They stopped investing in the retail offering. They stopped investing in maintaining the stores. And it got to the point where, probably 6 or 7 or even 8 years ago, they basically became a squatter in the shopping centers. The product was tired, the stores were tired, the hallways that led up to their boxes, you would see, the retailers start to suffer and then want to move away from the HBC store. And so when they went bankrupt, I mean, we had been drafting plans and then doing lots of analysis. This SWAT team that we have, analyzing what the situation was, what the alternatives were, sort of having soft discussions with retailers years ago about who might want to take this space because we knew inevitably they were going to go. In fact, we'd had discussion a year ago, 2 years ago about, is there any way we can accelerate the insolvency so that we can get these stores back sooner rather than later? And when it actually happened, it was just fantastic news. So we've actually been in limbo for 7, 8 months now, 9 months since the bankruptcy was announced. There were some contested lease assignments and a bunch of other things that went on, and we're just in the process of being able to reveal, as of this morning, the progress that we've made on a number of the leases. So we have about 1.3 million square feet in total. We announced leases this morning for about 400,000 square feet. And remember, we only had half of that space available to us from June. The other half we're getting back at the end of next month. So the retail landscape in Canada is pretty remarkable. People stopped building retail space about 10 years ago, and the population growth in Canada has been pretty robust. And as we focus on the dominant shopping center in the markets, we're seeing very strong demand for our shopping centers. So it's I think there's a bit of skepticism and hesitation, from analysts and investors about, what's going to happen here. But when you sit inside, you can see that there's an awful lot of demand, and this is definitely going to be a pretty positive outcome for Primaris.
It's funny, from as an outsider to the business, you hear, "Oh no, a bunch of stores are closing. That must be bad news for the owner of the mall." But in this market right now, they're like, "Yeah, let's go."
Well, and this one in particular, I mean, the average rent in place was about $4.
Oh, jeez.
Our average large box rent is closer to $16, and we think we can do a lot better than that in a lot of these cases. It's pretty remarkable, and they also came with all sorts of no builds and parking ratios. I mean, they were the original anchor leases from when the shopping centers were developed, and in a lot of cases in Canada, the department store actually owned the developer. And so they were building themselves a store, and then they added on a little bit of CRU to help offset the cost of their store. So they wrote the leases, 100% in favor of the tenant, and then ultimately ended up selling the real estate. But, the leases were very, very onerous for the landlords, and it was definitively a fabulous thing for us to get these leases back.
So are there a lot of large is there anybody who would lease out one of those whole boxes, or are you going to have to carve them up into smaller spaces?
We have a variety of scenarios that we're working on. We do have some very large retailers that want to take the entire box. If you looked at our top 3 retailers in our tenant list, those would be the types of retailers. Canadian Tire, Walmart, Loblaws, those types of retailers can take a full HBC box, which is, roughly 125,000 square feet on average in our portfolio. Sometimes on 2 floors, sometimes it's on 1 floor. But we've got some of those. So if we had 10, imagine we probably have 3 single tenant solutions. We've probably got 3 or 4 where we'll take 1 floor and rent it out to a TJX type of a user. We might have a grocery store on the other floor or some combination. And then the third scenario is really more where we've got a mall that just doesn't have enough space. I mean, Halifax would be a good example. There doesn't happen to be a bay there. We have another mall, Conestoga, that has a bay in it. And I think the ultimate plan there will be to extend the corridor into the box and create more CRU units with a smaller box at the end. The rents there, aren't $16, they're $75 or $100 for the prime CRU in a good mall.
And for a listener, I think that's Canadian term CRU. That's commercial retail units. Is that right? Yeah. So
Correct.
shop
Yeah, it's the
space,
inline
inline
space,
space
the
is what
shop
we
space.
call that in the U.S.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. So who you mentioned some of the kind of the big Canadian anchors. Who's expanding in Canada right now? Is it similar to the set of folks that we're seeing in the U.S. or is it a different subset?
Well, my partner Pat is really the
Oh,
guy who deals with all of that, but I will tell you that I sit with him and listen to him tell investors about this all the time. Um, we have a very broad array of retailers that are expanding everywhere from the very large retailers to the grocers in Canada have been on a big expansion plan. The cosmetics groups,
yeah.
Sephora's and similar, have been expanding. The athletic wear groups have been expanding. Lots of lots of Asian retailers have been expanding in Canada, and we've been doing a lot of deals there. Korean cosmetics and all sorts of clothing. It's been there's been a lot of demand there, but I would say as a general rule, it's been across the board, and it's I think one of the things that sometimes investors and analysts ask us about is the economy seems to be maybe a little bit shaky. There's a condo market crash going on in Toronto and in
Hmm.
Vancouver. We've got some tariff issues that we're dealing with, and so there's concerns about the economy. And what I've been saying to people, and what is the case is, there is a real impact on the consumer when the economy softens, but the landlord is sort of two steps removed from that. And the dynamic between the retailer and the landlord right now is that there is very limited space left in Canada, and there's no construction even. No one's even threatening to build any significant amount of retail. So there's a real scramble going on for people to lock down their stores. They want to really be comfortable that they're covering the market. So real estate is cyclical, and you definitely couldn't have said that 10 or 7 or 5 or 6 years ago, but today it is definitely a landlord's market here.
We we run a couple different shoppers surveys both in the U.S. and Canada. My research team, and we just ran our holiday survey. And in Canada, shoppers are spending more this year on the holidays. In the U.S., they're scaling back. Now I can't. Right. Yeah. I'm like, why is that? Like we double checked, and it's when you split it up by income groups, it's quite different. High net worth individuals are spending more. But anyway, overall, the Canadian consumer story is quite positive. So, one of your recent acquisitions has Mega Park, which is like a well amusement park, right?
Yeah.
Is there? Well, I have two part question. One, do you guys manage? Do you have to manage that now? Yeah.
Yep, we do.
So you're in the amusement
They
park business now.
The amusement park came with 90 mostly part-time employees, but it's a real amusement park. We did an investor day there in September, and we took a bunch of the analysts and the investors on the roller coaster. And I got off the roller coaster and like weak knees, queasy stomach, like it was a real roller coaster. I was not expecting that. It shoots through the roof and comes back in and loops around. It's a pretty interesting property. I mean, if you look at there are some examples. The Mall of America or the West Edmonton
Yeah.
Mall, both have really big amusement-oriented components to their shopping centers. I mean, both of those malls would be 5 million square feet. Uh, uh, Lake Ellery de la Capitale is where the amusement park is, and that one's more like a million 2 square feet, something like that. But um, that is a really interesting piece to that shopping center, and it drives a lot of traffic into the shopping center.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Mall of America. I was just there last week, and it's so funny to have just a full on amusement park with a roller coaster and just retail all around it. Do you think? And we talk a lot. about kind of this transition to shopping destinations being more entertainment focused. Do you feel like you've got more entertainment tenants potentially to lease to, or is it not so much? What are your thoughts on entertainment in your centers?
Yeah, I would say we have not done a lot of that. The Lake Ellery de la Capitale is a unique situation. If you're going to do something like that, you kind of have to do it on a grand scale. Um, my our president and chief operating officer often likes to say that going to a pickleball use or a similar use is kind of like wearing track pants to work. You've kind of given up at that point. You're not really that serious. The shopping centers that we target are really the dominant retail node in the market. We're targeting malls that have $250 million of retail sales through the inline space or more. And those malls, they drive their own traffic. You don't need to bring entertainment uses in, and the entertainment uses tend not to actually drive shopping traffic. You end up with people there, but it doesn't necessarily complement the shopping center. So we do have lots of pads for restaurants in the parking lot. We've got some restaurants in the malls, but I wouldn't say that we've had a significant shift. I think that's, when you start looking for alternative uses for your space, you might be in a position where you want to evaluate whether or not you're the best shopping center in the market, and maybe the entire mall could be used as something else.
Well, that's interesting. In the U.S., there's certainly been a shift in percentage of square footage of a mall that's devoted to food and beverage and entertainment. Like, it's not as high as it was like a few years ago, but it was growing for a while. And I think, to your point, that's because we were a little overbuilt on the retail space, unlike in Canada where it's been much more responsible, right?
Yeah, there's a strong parallel with the office markets as well, and I remember a few different people saying, that we aren't overbuilt, we're under demolished in the office
Yeah.
market, and I think that would be the case in the mall market. And there's a lot more parallel between the office business and the mall business. I mean, malls went through a very tough time before office went into that tough time. But what you're seeing in the office market is the AAA space is full, all-time high rent, 100% occupancy, and the C space is really struggling. And I think that's the case in the mall business as well. For the malls that really dominate their market, they are thriving. And if you're the fourth mall in a market, like, you probably want to evaluate, your pickleball uses, or maybe, tearing down a portion of the shopping center, because the mall was a really good idea 50 years ago. And then, as people always do, they took it a little too far. You know, the only thing that really kills a mall is another mall close by.
Right. Yeah. We definitely saw a lot of that. Not recently, but in the recent history. So I was on your earnings call today, the investor presentation, and I saw that slogan that you have, becoming the first call, which means you want to be the first call a retailer makes when they're looking to open new stores. How big, I'm sure you're one of the first calls, but how big do you need to be portfolio wise in Canada to really know you're going to be the first call for every new retailer?
Yeah, it's interesting because as we went through a lot of this strategy work that I was talking about earlier, um, it's easy to frame things in size and
Mm,
dollars. And that's why we came up with the becoming the first call, um, sort of framing of our strategy. And it's not no, it's not so much about the number of shopping centers. It's more about, what are you offering to the retailers? Do they want to be in your shopping centers? And to the extent that you have a lot of shopping centers that are the ones that they really want to be in. So it's a combination of size and quality and market dominance. And so you could frame it as, if you're coming to Canada, you want to hit,
yeah.
75% of the population. And so you need to have a strong mall in each of the major population centers. That's one aspect to it. Having, sort of those knockout shopping centers. We've got a mall in Edmonton that does $1,400 a square foot in sales. We've got a handful that are over $1,000. I mean, our average sales per square foot are about $800 pro forma this last acquisition. So it's a combination of things, but right now we are the largest mall landlord in Canada by square feet and by mall count. But there are some other large pension funds who own some really great shopping centers, and they still own a lot of shopping centers. We'd like to buy some more of those shopping centers. And, a lot of their very strong shopping centers are going to continue to be very strong, even if they own, 20% fewer shopping centers. I don't know that you ever truly can sort of put your line in the sand and say, we are the first call, but we want to be very competitive and, strive to become the first call. So,
Yep.
I mean, Cadillac Fairview would be the largest with some pretty remarkable shopping centers. Oxford Properties has a smaller number of shopping centers, but they have some pretty remarkable ones. Yorkdale is, a shopping center that does close to $3,000 a square foot, over 2 million square feet. I mean, Bal Harbour is a pretty impressive shopping center, but it's a much smaller shopping center.
Yeah. Would you ever want to own a big old luxury mall like, something like that? Or do is that something you'd have ambitions for?
Yorkdale is a very big shopping
Yeah.
center. Until probably the beginning of this year, it would have been about the same size dollar value wise as our entire
I
portfolio.
see.
So it was a little too big for our ability to swallow, but I wouldn't rule it out at some point in the future. It's a fantastic shopping center, but I would say it's not on our near-term horizon to take down anything that big or that ambitious. There are a number of other shopping centers that dominate in their markets, but not on the same scale as that shopping center.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but I've got one more question I wanted to ask you about, and that's about technology. So a lot of times we're sort of expected to make guesses on how we think technology is going to impact, retail, and, oftentimes you've got to make investments based on those guesses. Are there any technologies right now that you think, hey, we really need to get in on this, some new AI, computer vision? I don't know. What are your thoughts on technology investments in the shopping center space?
Well, as we were designing Primaris from a blank slate, we wanted to make sure that we had all of the ingredients to be successful. You noted that, Marco Biasiato, who's on our team, he's right on top of that stuff. He's part of the ICSC research group. And so he keeps us up to date on a lot of the evolving technology integrations into retail. We also have Deborah Weinswig from CoreSite on our board. So she is right on top of things and helps us with technology. Our head of our head of IT, Joseph, is really great at IT as well, at technology as well. And so I've been spending a lot of time with him on AI and how we can roll AI throughout the organization, more from like an operations perspective, not into the retail offering. But on the retail offering, social media is a big part of it. We've got a growing social media group trying to activate a lot of the spaces. And we have been spending a lot of time trying to figure out, do we monetize data and how do we capture that data? Thus far, we have not done a whole lot on that front, but I think it's an untapped opportunity that we'll get to. We've been very busy on a lot of fronts, but we do spend a lot of time on technology trying to figure out exactly how to optimize.
All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. I just, it's just so much fun to hear about a REIT actively acquiring malls and just doing exciting stuff. So thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure. I enjoy listening to the podcast.
Oh, excellent.
Thanks,
Thank
James.
you. And if you like this podcast, do me a favor, go into the app that you're listening to and give us a rating. Even better, you could give us a little review, write a sentence about something you liked or, didn't like about the show. You could subscribe to Where We Buy on the iPhone podcast app. We're also on Spotify. Really, any podcast app, just search for Where We Buy and you're going to probably find us. We're also on the web at WhereWeBuy.show. If you've got a specific question about retail, shopping centers, or retail real estate, feel free to connect and message with me on LinkedIn. Just search for James Cook, JLL. And our theme music is Run in the Night by the Good Lords under Creative Commons license.